When Michael Jordan walked into Chicago's biggest sports dinner, he expected a normal evening. Then the event coordinator did something unthinkable. She asked the basketball legend to move to the back of the room. Michael quietly walked to a table with three strangers: an old man in a wheelchair, a nervous young woman, and a doctor. What seemed like an embarrassing mistake was actually the beginning of the most incredible night of his life. As the evening unfolded, a 30-year-old secret was revealed that connected all four people in ways no one could have imagined. When the truth came out, the entire crowd was left in tears. But what Michael did as a teenager that he had forgotten about? And why was the person sitting next to him the most important stranger he would ever meet? The bright lights of the Chicago Grand Ballroom sparkled like diamonds. Red carpets covered the floors. Golden decorations hung from the ceiling. Tonight was the biggest sports event of the year. Famous athletes walked through the doors with their families. Cameras flashed everywhere. Michael Jordan stepped out of his black car. He wore his best suit and a warm smile. His wife Yvette looked beautiful in her blue dress. Their 10-year-old daughter Zara held his hand tightly. She had never been to such a fancy party before. "Daddy, look at all the famous people," Zara whispered. She pointed at baseball players and football stars walking past them. "Remember what we talked about," Michael said softly. "Famous doesn't mean more important. Everyone here has a story worth hearing." They walked through the tall glass doors. Inside, the ballroom was even more amazing. Round tables covered with white cloth filled the room. Crystal glasses caught the light. Waiters in black uniforms carried silver trays of food. Michael looked around at the other guests. He recognized many faces. Some were old friends from his basketball days. Others were wealthy business owners who sponsored sports teams. Everyone looked happy and excited. "Mr. Jordan," a woman's voice called out. Michael turned to see Patricia Hendricks walking toward them. She was the event coordinator. Her face looked nervous, but she tried to smile. She wore a black dress and carried a clipboard. "Mr. Jordan, it's such an honor to have you here tonight," Patricia said. Her hands shook a little as she spoke. "Thank you for inviting us," Michael replied. "This looks like a wonderful event." Patricia's smile became more nervous. She looked down at her clipboard, then back up at Michael. "I'm so sorry, but there's been a small mix-up with the seating arrangements." Michael raised his eyebrows. "A mix-up?" "Yes," Patricia said quickly. "We have some very important corporate sponsors who need to sit in the front tables. Would it be possible for you and your family to move to one of the back tables? I know it's not ideal, but of course," Michael said without hesitation. "No problem at all." Patricia looked surprised. She had expected him to be upset. "Are you sure? I feel terrible about this." "Don't worry about it," Michael said with a genuine smile. "The view is probably better from the back anyway." Yvette squeezed her husband's arm. She was proud of how kind he was being. Zara looked up at her father with curious eyes. "Why do we have to sit in the back, Daddy?" Zara asked. "Sometimes the best seats aren't where you think they are," Michael told her. "We'll find out tonight." Patricia led them through the crowd toward the back of the ballroom. As they walked, people whispered and pointed. Some looked confused. Others seemed embarrassed for Michael. A few wealthy guests smirked and went back to their conversations. Michael kept his head high. He smiled and waved at people he recognized. He didn't look angry or upset. He just walked calmly with his family. The back table was smaller than the ones in front. It had the same white cloth and crystal glasses, but it was tucked away in a corner. Two people were already sitting there. An elderly man in a wheelchair sat facing the stage. He wore an old Chicago Cubs baseball cap and a clean but worn shirt. His hands looked rough from years of hard work. His eyes were kind and gentle. Next to him sat a young woman who looked very nervous. She had dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a plain black dress that looked like her best outfit. She kept looking down at her hands and fidgeting with her napkin. "Looks like we're the back row crew tonight," Michael said cheerfully as he pulled out chairs for his wife and daughter. The elderly man looked up at Michael. His eyes went wide with surprise. Not because Michael was famous, but for a different reason. Something deeper. Something that would change everything before the night was over. "I'm Michael," he said, reaching out to shake the old man's hand. "This is my wife Yvette and my daughter Zora." "Arthur," the old man said softly. His voice shook a little. "Arthur Williams." The young woman finally looked up. "I'm Carmen Rodriguez," she said quietly. "I work at the Children's Hospital." "Nice to meet you both," Michael said as he sat down. "What brings you here tonight?" Arthur stared at Michael for a long moment. His eyes filled with tears, but he quickly wiped them away. "Just supporting the community," he said, but there was something in Arthur's voice. Something that suggested this meeting was more than just chance. Something that would soon reveal a connection that had been 30 years in the making. As the servers began bringing out the first course, Michael had no idea that sitting in the back row would lead to the most important conversation of his life. The salad plates clinked softly as waiters placed them on their table. At the front tables, guests barely looked at their food. They were too busy talking about business deals and vacation plans. But at the back table, something different was happening. "So Arthur," Michael said, cutting his salad into small pieces. "Tell me about yourself. What do you do?" Arthur's weathered hands trembled slightly as he picked up his fork. "I used to coach baseball," he said quietly. "Youth league mostly. Kids from the south side of Chicago." "Used to?" Yvette asked gently. Arthur gestured to his wheelchair. "Had a stroke 3 years ago. Can't get around like I used to." He smiled sadly. "But I coached for 40 years before that." Zara's eyes grew wide. 40 years? That's 4 times older than me." Arthur chuckled. "That's right, young lady. I started coaching when I was 25. Coached kids who had nothing. Some of them lived in apartments with no heat. Others didn't have enough food at home." Michael stopped eating. "What did you do for them?" "Whatever I could," Arthur said, his voice growing stronger. "I kept a box of sandwiches in my car. After practice, if a kid looked hungry, I'd give them food to take home. No questions asked." Arthur's eyes grew distant as he remembered. Some nights, practice was the only safe place those kids had. Their neighborhoods were rough. Gang fights, drug dealers on every corner. But on that baseball field, they could just be children. Carmen had been listening quietly. Now she spoke up. "That's beautiful, Mr. Williams. You gave them hope." "I tried," Arthur said. "We didn't have much money for equipment. I bought gloves and bats with my own paycheck. Sometimes I'd ask local stores to donate old baseballs. The kids didn't care if the equipment was used. They just wanted to play." Michael leaned forward. "Did you have your own field?" Arthur's face lit up. "We had 3 fields, actually. Well, they weren't really fields when we started. Just empty lots full of trash and broken glass. The city wouldn't clean them up, so we did it ourselves." "You cleaned them yourself?" Zara asked. "Every Saturday morning." Arthur nodded. "Parents, kids, neighbors. We'd bring shovels and trash bags. Took us months to clear each lot. Then we built the fields with our own hands. Put up fences, made dugouts out of old wood, painted the bases." Yvette wiped a tear from her eye. "That's incredible." "The best part," Arthur continued, "was watching those kids discover they were good at something. Many of them had never felt successful before. But when they hit their first home run or made a great catch, their whole faces would change." At the front tables, a loud laugh interrupted their conversation. A wealthy businessman was telling jokes about his new yacht. His friends raised their champagne glasses and toasted his success. They hadn't touched their food either. Michael glanced at the front tables, then back at Arthur. "Did any of your players go on to play in high school or college?" Arthur's smile grew bigger. 15 of my boys got college scholarships. 3 played professional baseball. But I'm most proud of the ones who became teachers, policemen, and fathers. They learned to work hard and help others." Carmen nodded. "I see kids like that at the hospital where I work. They come from tough neighborhoods, but they have so much strength." "Tell us about your work, Carmen," Michael said. Carmen's cheeks turned red. She wasn't used to people asking about her job. "I work in the children's cancer ward at Chicago General Hospital. I'm not a nurse or doctor. I just help kids feel less scared." "How do you do that?" Zara asked. "I read them stories. I play games with them. Sometimes I just sit with them so they're not alone." Carmen's voice was soft, but full of love. "When kids are really sick, they get frightened. The hospital is big and loud and full of strange machines. I try to make it feel less scary." Michael was impressed. "That sounds like very important work." Carmen shook her head. "It's not important like the people up front. I just try to make kids smile when they're hurting. Making children smile when they're hurting is the most important job in the world," Arthur said firmly. From the stage, the evening's host began making announcements about the awards. At the front tables, people finally stopped talking about themselves and started paying attention. But at the back table, Michael was more interested in his new friends than in the ceremony. Carmen, what made you want to work with sick children? Yvette asked. Carmen was quiet for a moment. My little brother had cancer when he was 7. He spent months in the hospital. There was a lady there who did the same job I do now. She made him laugh every day, even when he felt terrible. Is your brother okay now? Zara asked with worry in her voice. Carmen smiled. He's perfect now. He's in college studying to be a teacher. The lady at the hospital inspired him to help other kids, just like she helped him. Arthur reached over and patted Carmen's hand. You're continuing the circle, young lady. Someone helped your brother. Now you help other children. Michael watched this exchange with growing amazement. Here at the back table, tucked away from all the important people, sat 2 individuals who had spent their lives helping others. They didn't have money or fame, but they had something much more valuable. You know what I think? Michael said, looking around their small table. I think we got the best seats in the house tonight. Arthur looked at Michael with tears forming in his eyes again, but he still hadn't explained why seeing Michael affected him so deeply. The secret was still locked away, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. As the main course arrived and the awards ceremony began, none of them knew that the biggest surprise of the evening was yet to come. The lights dimmed in the ballroom. A spotlight shone on the stage where Patricia Hendricks stood behind a golden podium. She looked much more confident now than when she had asked Michael to move to the back. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia announced, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone. Thank you all for joining us tonight for our annual Chicago Sports Heroes Gala. The crowd applauded politely. At the front tables, people put down their phones and wine glasses to pay attention. At the back table, Michael, Arthur, Carmen, Yvette, and Zara also turned toward the stage. Tonight, we honor athletes who have made our city proud, Patricia continued. But we also celebrate something even more important. We celebrate people who use sports to change lives. Arthur shifted uncomfortably in his wheelchair. Carmen played with her napkin nervously. Neither of them expected to be mentioned at an event like this. Patricia smiled broadly. This year, we have a very special award to present. The Lifetime Achievement Award for Community Service. The crowd murmured with interest. This was always the most meaningful award of the evening. Past winners included famous coaches and wealthy donors who had built new stadiums. This award goes to someone who has worked quietly for decades, Patricia explained. Someone who never asked for recognition or praise. Someone who saw children in need and decided to do something about it. Michael found himself leaning forward. He had a feeling this award would be special. Our winner spent 40 years coaching youth baseball in some of Chicago's toughest neighborhoods, Patricia continued. He used his own money to buy equipment for kids who couldn't afford it. He turned empty lots into baseball fields with his bare hands. Arthur's face went pale. His hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair tightly. He fed hungry children. He gave hope to kids who had none. He taught them that hard work and teamwork could overcome any obstacle. Carmen gasped and put her hand over her mouth. She was starting to understand what was happening. This man built 3 baseball fields from nothing. He coached over 500 children. 15 of his players received college scholarships. But more importantly, he showed them how to be good people. Arthur's eyes filled with tears. He shook his head in disbelief. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia announced with pride in her voice. This year's Lifetime Achievement Award for Community Service goes to Coach Arthur Williams. The entire ballroom erupted in applause. People at the front tables turned around to look toward the back. They were trying to see who Arthur Williams was. Arthur sat frozen in his wheelchair. I can't believe this, he whispered. Michael stood up immediately and started clapping loudly. Yes, he shouted with joy. Arthur, this is incredible. Yvette and Zara jumped to their feet, applauding enthusiastically. Carmen was crying happy tears as she clapped. I don't deserve this, Arthur said, still in shock. You deserve this more than anyone, Michael replied firmly. Patricia continued speaking from the stage. Arthur Williams never asked for money or fame. He just saw children who needed help, and he helped them. He built those baseball fields on weekends and evenings after working his regular job at the post office. The crowd was listening intently now. Even the wealthy donors at the front tables seemed moved by Arthur's story. Coach Williams taught his players more than baseball, Patricia said. He taught them about character, determination, and giving back to their community. Many of his former players are now teachers, coaches, and community leaders themselves. Arthur wiped tears from his cheeks. "This is too much," he said quietly. Michael walked behind Arthur's wheelchair and began pushing him toward the stage. "Come on, coach. Your moment has arrived." As they moved through the crowd, people stood up to applaud. Some were wiping away tears. Others were smiling with genuine admiration. The atmosphere in the room had completely changed from the beginning of the evening. "I've never been on a stage before," Arthur said nervously as Michael pushed his wheelchair down the aisle. "Just speak from your heart," Michael encouraged him. "Tell them what you told us." When they reached the stage, the applause grew even louder. Patricia bent down to help Arthur position his wheelchair at the microphone. The spotlight was bright, but Arthur's eyes were beginning to adjust. He looked out at the crowd. All these successful, wealthy, famous people were standing and clapping for him. A man who had spent his life helping children in poor neighborhoods. But then Arthur looked back at Michael, who was standing beside him on the stage. And something passed between them. A recognition. A memory from long ago. Arthur's voice shook as he leaned toward the microphone. "I don't deserve this award," he began. "I just did what felt right." The crowd settled down to listen. "I want to tell you about the kids I coached," Arthur continued, his voice growing stronger. "They came from neighborhoods where hope was hard to find, but they had something special inside them. They just needed someone to believe in them." Arthur paused, looking directly at Michael. "But I also want to tell you about the day that changed my life forever. It was 30 years ago. I was struggling to keep my baseball program alive. We had no money, no equipment, and I was starting to lose hope." The crowd was completely silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving. "That's when a teenager showed up at our practice," Arthur continued. "He was tall, thin, and he could play basketball like I'd never seen before. But he didn't come to show off." Arthur's voice began to crack with emotion. He came to help. Michael felt his heart racing. A memory was starting to come back to him. "This young man spent his entire summer with us," Arthur said, tears flowing freely now. "He taught our kids how to play. He bought them equipment with his own money, and he never told anyone about it." The crowd was beginning to understand that something extraordinary was being revealed. Arthur looked directly at Michael Jordan. "That teenager taught me what real greatness looks like. He showed me that champions don't just win games. They lift up others." The murmur in the crowd was growing louder. People were starting to connect the dots. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur said, his voice now strong and clear, "that 17-year-old boy who changed my life was Michael Jordan." The entire ballroom gasped in unison. Every head in the room turned to look at Michael Jordan. He stood on the stage next to Arthur's wheelchair, his face showing surprise and emotion. He remembered that summer 30 years ago, but he had never known how much it meant to Arthur. The crowd was buzzing with whispers. "Did you know about this?" people asked each other. Michael Jordan coached baseball. He was only 17. Patricia Hendricks stood at the side of the stage, tears streaming down her face. This was not what she had expected when she planned the evening. Arthur adjusted the microphone and continued speaking. His voice was stronger now, filled with purpose. "I need you to understand what Chicago looked like 30 years ago," Arthur said to the crowd. "The South Side was rough, really rough. Kids walked through gang territory just to get to school. Drug dealers stood on every corner. Gunshots at night were normal. The wealthy guests at the front tables looked uncomfortable. This wasn't the kind of story they usually heard at fancy events. My baseball team practiced in Garfield Park," Arthur continued. "We had 12 kids, all between 8 and 15 years old. Some of them hadn't eaten lunch that day. Others came to practice with bruises from fights in their neighborhoods." Arthur paused, looking out at the silent crowd. "We didn't have real uniforms. The kids wore whatever clothes they had. Our gloves were old and torn. Our bats were cracked. But those kids loved baseball more than anything in the world." Michael listened carefully. The memories were flooding back to him now. That hot summer when he was 17. His mother had told him to find something useful to do with his time. "One day in June, this tall teenager walked onto our field," Arthur said, gesturing toward Michael. "He had a basketball in his hands, but he watched our practice for an hour. When we finished, he came over to me." Arthur smiled at the memory. He said, "Coach, I don't know much about baseball, but I know about working hard. Can I help your team?" The crowd was completely silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving. Everyone wanted to hear what happened next. I was suspicious at First, Arthur admitted, rich kids from the north side didn't usually come to Garfield Park. I thought maybe he was there to cause trouble. But this young man was different. Michael felt his throat getting tight with emotion. He remembered how nervous he had been that first day. Michael showed up every single day for 3 months. Arthur continued. He taught our kids how to run faster and jump higher. He showed them exercises to build their strength. He brought them water bottles when it was hot and extra sweatshirts when it was cold. Arthur's voice began to crack with emotion again. But the most important thing he brought was belief. He looked at these kids from the toughest neighborhood in Chicago, and he saw champions. At the back table, Carmen was sobbing quietly. Yvette held Zara close, both of them amazed by this story they had never heard before. Michael didn't just coach our kids, Arthur said. He became their big brother. When one boy's father left home, Michael took him out for hamburgers and told him he was still valuable. When another kid failed a test in school, Michael helped him study. The crowd was starting to understand that this was more than just sports coaching. This was about changing young lives. By the end of that summer, our team was different, Arthur said proudly. Not just because they were better players, but because they believed in themselves. They walked taller. They smiled more. They had hope. Arthur looked directly at Michael. And it was all because a 17-year-old boy chose to spend his summer helping kids he didn't even know. The applause started slowly, then grew louder and louder. People were standing up all over the ballroom. But Arthur raised his hand for silence. He wasn't finished yet. But that's not the most important part of the story, Arthur said quietly. The crowd immediately fell silent again. Michael felt his heart pounding. What else was Arthur going to say? You see, Michael didn't just help our baseball team that summer, Arthur continued. He saved a life. He saved my grandson's life. Michael's eyes went wide. He was starting to remember something else from that summer, something he had tried to forget. My daughter brought her 8-year-old son to practice every day. Arthur explained to the crowd. His name was Marcus. He was a sweet little boy who loved watching the big kids play baseball. Arthur's voice began to shake. But Marcus was sick, very sick. The doctors said he needed surgery right away, or he might die. The crowd was holding its breath. This story was becoming more emotional than anyone had expected. The surgery cost more money than our family had, Arthur said, tears flowing freely now. We tried everything. We asked churches for help. We held fundraisers. We even started selling our furniture. But it wasn't enough. Michael closed his eyes, remembering now. Little Marcus with the big smile and the weak heart. The doctors who said the surgery couldn't wait much longer. I was desperate, Arthur continued. I didn't know what to do. I was going to lose my grandson, and there was nothing I could do to save him. Arthur looked up at Michael with love and gratitude in his eyes. That's when Michael Jordan, a 17-year-old kid who barely knew us, did something incredible. The crowd leaned forward, waiting to hear what happened next. Arthur's voice grew strong and clear. Michael found out about Marcus's condition. He never said a word to me about it, but he quietly paid for the entire surgery. He paid for all the hospital bills. He made sure my grandson got the best doctors in Chicago. The gasps from the crowd were audible now. People were crying openly. Even the toughest athletes in the room were wiping their eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur said, his voice filled with love, my grandson lived because Michael Jordan cared enough to help a family he barely knew. The crowd erupted in applause again. But Arthur still wasn't finished. He had one more surprise that would change everything. My grandson grew up healthy and strong, Arthur continued. He became a doctor himself. He spent his life helping other sick children, just like Michael helped him. Arthur paused for dramatic effect. Ladies and gentlemen, my grandson is Dr. Marcus Williams. He's the head of pediatric surgery at Chicago Children's Hospital. The crowd gasped again. Carmen's mouth fell open in shock. She knew Dr. Williams. He was one of the best doctors at her hospital. Arthur looked directly at Michael one more time. And Michael, he said quietly, there's something else you need to know about Marcus. Michael felt his knees getting weak. What else could there be? Arthur smiled through his tears. Marcus is here tonight. He's been wanting to meet the man who saved his life for 30 years. Michael felt the room spinning around him. His legs were shaking. Yvette stood up from the back table and walked toward the stage to support her husband. She had never seen him look so overwhelmed. Where is he? Michael asked quietly, his voice barely reaching the microphone. Arthur pointed toward a table near the middle of the ballroom. "Marcus, would you please stand up?" A tall man in his late 30s slowly rose from his chair. He wore a navy blue suit and had the same gentle eyes as his grandfather. His hands were steady and strong, the hands of a surgeon who saved children's lives every day. Doctor Marcus Williams looked directly at Michael Jordan. Tears were already flowing down his face. The crowd turned to watch as Marcus began walking toward the stage. His steps were slow and careful, as if he couldn't quite believe this moment was really happening. Carmen gasped from the back table. "That's Dr. Williams," she whispered to Zara. "He's the one who saved my little brother's life 3 years ago." The connections were becoming bigger and more amazing with each passing moment. As Marcus reached the stage, Patricia Hendricks helped him climb the steps. Now 3 men stood together under the bright lights. Arthur in his wheelchair, Michael fighting back tears, and Marcus walking toward the man who had saved his life. "Mr. Jordan," Marcus said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I've dreamed about this moment since I was 8 years old." Michael couldn't speak. He just stared at this successful doctor who had once been a sick little boy. Marcus continued, "I don't remember much about being sick. I was so young. But I remember lying in the hospital bed, scared and worried. My mom and grandpa were crying all the time. They thought I was going to die." The crowd was completely silent. Even the people at the front tables had stopped checking their phones. Then one day, everything changed, Marcus said. "The doctors told my family that someone had paid for my surgery. Someone who wanted to remain anonymous. Someone who didn't want any thanks or recognition." Marcus looked directly at Michael. "For 30 years, I've wondered who that person was. I became a doctor because I wanted to help other children the same way someone helped me." Arthur reached up from his wheelchair and took Michael's hand. "Tell him, son. Tell him what you remember." Michael wiped his eyes and leaned toward the microphone. "I remember you," he said softly. "You were so small, but you were so brave. You never complained, even when you were scared." Marcus started crying harder. "You remember me?" "I remember all of you," Michael said, looking between Arthur and Marcus. "Your grandfather was the most dedicated coach I'd ever seen. He loved those kids like they were his own children. And you were the little boy who made everyone smile, even when you were feeling sick." Michael paused, gathering his strength to continue. "When I found out about your surgery, I couldn't just do nothing. You were part of our team family, and family takes care of each other." The crowd was mesmerized by this conversation. Many people were crying openly now. Marcus took a step closer to Michael. "Do you know what you gave me? You didn't just save my life. You gave me the chance to become who I am today." "What do you mean?" Michael asked. "I've spent the last 15 years as a pediatric surgeon," Marcus explained. "I've performed over 2,000 surgeries on children. I've saved hundreds of lives. Every time I operate, I think about the anonymous person who saved me." The crowd murmured with amazement. One act of kindness had led to thousands of other lives being saved. "But that's not all," Marcus continued. 5 years ago, I started a program at the hospital. We provide free surgery for children whose families can't afford it. We've helped over 300 kids so far." Arthur was beaming with pride. "Tell him about the clinic, Marcus." Marcus smiled through his tears. "We're building a free medical clinic in Garfield Park, right next to the baseball fields my grandfather built. It opens next month. We're going to provide free health care for any child who needs it." Michael felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what his teenage generosity had created. One surgery payment had grown into a lifetime of healing. "Mr. Jordan," Marcus said, "I need to tell you something else. Something that makes this story even more incredible." Michael wasn't sure he could handle any more surprises. Marcus looked directly into Michael's eyes. "For the past 3 months, I've been treating a patient who checked into the hospital under a different name. A patient who insisted on being treated like everyone else, with no special treatment." Michael's face went pale. He suddenly understood where this was going. "This patient has been fighting cancer," Marcus continued. "He's been brave and determined, just like the teenager who helped my grandfather's baseball team 30 years ago." The crowd was holding its breath. What was Marcus about to reveal? "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice now strong and clear, "that patient is Michael Jordan. I've been trying to save his life, just like he saved mine 30 years ago." The entire ballroom erupted in gasps and shocked whispers. People couldn't believe what they were hearing. Michael nodded slowly. It's true. I've been getting treatment for cancer, and Marcus has been my doctor. He doesn't know that I know who he is. He's just been taking amazing care of me. Arthur wheeled his chair closer to both men. You boys have been taking care of each other your whole lives without even knowing it. Marcus looked at Michael with new understanding. Mr. Johnson, that's you. You're my patient who always asks about my other young patients. You're the one who's been paying for extra treatments for kids whose insurance won't cover everything. Michael smiled weakly. You're a great doctor, Marcus. You reminded me why I wanted to help people in the first place. The crowd was amazed by these revelations. The circle of kindness had come full circle in the most beautiful way possible. But Marcus wasn't finished. He had one more surprise that would make this the most emotional night of Michael's life. Mr. Jordan, Marcus said, his voice filled with joy. I have some news about your treatment. Michael looked at him with hope and fear in his eyes. Marcus smiled the biggest smile of his life. The cancer is gone. You're going to be perfectly fine. The entire ballroom erupted like a volcano. People jumped to their feet, cheering and crying at the same time. The sound was so loud that the crystal glasses on the tables began to shake. Michael's knees buckled, and he almost fell down. Yvette rushed onto the stage and wrapped her arms around her husband. Zara ran up behind her, hugging both her parents tightly. Are you sure? Michael asked Marcus, his voice filled with hope and disbelief. I'm absolutely sure, Marcus replied, pulling out his phone. I got the final test results this afternoon. I was going to call you tomorrow, but this seems like the perfect time to share the news. Arthur wheeled his chair over to Michael and Marcus. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, he said, tears of joy streaming down his face. The crowd was still cheering. Even the wealthy donors at the front tables were on their feet, applauding with genuine emotion. Some of them were crying too. Carmen ran from the back table onto the stage. Dr. Williams, Mr. Jordan, this is amazing. She hugged both men, unable to contain her excitement. Patricia Hendricks took the microphone, her voice shaking with emotion. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've just witnessed the most incredible story in our organization's history. The crowd cheered again, but Michael raised his hand, asking for quiet. He had something important to say. Thank you all for celebrating with us. Michael began, his voice stronger now. But I want you to understand something. This story isn't really about me. He looked at Arthur and Marcus. This story is about how kindness grows, how one person helping another can create something bigger than anyone imagined. Michael gestured toward the crowd. 30 years ago, I was just a teenager who wanted to help. I had no idea that paying for one little boy's surgery would lead to this. Arthur nodded from his wheelchair. And I had no idea that one summer of coaching would change so many lives. Marcus stepped forward. And I had no idea that the sick little boy I once was would grow up to help the man who saved him. Carmen wiped happy tears from her eyes. And I had no idea that coming to this dinner would help me understand how all these beautiful stories connected. The crowd listened carefully as these four people shared their amazement at how their lives had woven together. I want to tell you what I've learned, Michael continued. The most important victories in life aren't the ones that happen on basketball courts or baseball fields. They're the ones that happen when we help each other. He looked directly at Arthur. This man taught me that lesson when I was 17 years old. He showed me that real champions take care of their communities. Arthur smiled proudly. And you showed me that young people can change the world when they care about others. Marcus addressed the crowd. I want everyone here to know something. In the past 5 years, our free clinic program has helped over 300 children. But we're just getting started. He paused, building excitement. Next month, we're opening the Arthur Williams Medical Center in Garfield Park. It will provide free health care for any child who needs it. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. But we're also opening something else, Marcus continued. The Michael Jordan Youth Leadership Academy. We're going to teach kids not just about sports, but about helping others and building strong communities. Michael looked surprised. You're naming it after me? Of course, Marcus replied. You taught me that the best way to honor someone's kindness is to pass it on to others. Arthur wheeled himself to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what I want you to remember about tonight. We thought we came here to honor athletes and donors. Instead, we learned about the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. He gestured toward the back table where they had been sitting. The most important people at any event aren't always the ones in the front row. Sometimes they're the ones quietly serving others in the background. Carmen stepped forward. I want to volunteer at the new medical center. I want to help kids feel safe and loved when they're scared. And I want to coach at the Leadership Academy. A voice called from the crowd. I want to teach kids what Coach Williams taught us. More voices joined in. I want to donate money for equipment. I can help build new basketball courts. My company will sponsor the medical center. One by one, people throughout the ballroom began volunteering to help. Athletes offered to mentor young people. Business owners pledged money. Doctors volunteered their time. Michael watched in amazement as the entire room transformed from a fancy dinner party into a planning session for helping their community. This is incredible, he said to Marcus and Arthur. One small act of kindness, 30 years ago, has grown into all of this. Marcus put his arm around Michael's shoulder. It grew because you taught me that when someone helps you, you have a responsibility to help others. Arthur nodded wisely. That's the secret to changing the world. One person helps another, who helps another, who helps another. It never stops growing. Patricia Hendricks returned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to make some changes to our organization. Instead of just honoring people once a year, we need to help them make a difference all year long. The crowd cheered their approval. Starting next month, the Chicago Sports Heroes Foundation will focus on building programs that help children and families in need. We'll work with Coach Williams, Dr. Williams, Michael Jordan, and all of you to create lasting change. Michael looked out at the crowd with gratitude and hope. You know what? Being asked to sit in the back row was the best thing that happened to me tonight. Arthur laughed. Sometimes the best view is from the back of the room. That's because the back row is where the real heroes sit, Marcus added. Carmen smiled through her happy tears. And now we're all going to be heroes together. As the evening continued, the four friends made plans for their new projects. They talked about basketball courts and medical clinics. They discussed leadership programs and community gardens. But most importantly, they talked about how one summer 30 years ago had created a family that would spend the rest of their lives taking care of each other and their community. The circle was now complete, but it was also just beginning to grow. As the excitement in the ballroom began to settle, Michael walked back to the microphone. His face showed a mix of joy, gratitude, and something else, something that looked like he had more to share. Before we end this incredible evening, Michael said, his voice carrying clearly through the room, I want to tell you the real reason I came here tonight. The crowd, which had started to gather their belongings, immediately stopped and turned their attention back to the stage. Arthur, Marcus, and Carmen looked at Michael with curiosity. 3 months ago, when I found out I was sick, I started thinking about my life differently, Michael continued. I thought about all the basketball games I'd won, all the trophies I'd earned, all the money I'd made. And you know what? None of that seemed important anymore. Yvette reached for his hand from the edge of the stage. Zara looked up at her father with wide, understanding eyes. What seemed important was the people I'd helped along the way, Michael said. The kids I'd coached, the families I'd supported, the communities I'd been part of. That's when I realized something. Michael paused, looking directly at Arthur. I realized that the most important thing I'd ever done wasn't winning an NBA championship. It was spending a summer in Garfield Park with a baseball coach who taught me what real greatness looks like. Arthur wiped fresh tears from his eyes. Son, you taught me just as much as I taught you. When I was going through cancer treatment, Michael continued, I kept thinking about that summer. I thought about how you never gave up on those kids, even when everything seemed hopeless. That gave me strength during my darkest days. The crowd listened intently as Michael shared his most personal thoughts. And then I found out that my doctor was Marcus Williams, Michael said, smiling at the young man beside him. I didn't know who he was at first. I just knew he was the most caring, dedicated doctor I'd ever met. Marcus stepped closer to Michael. You were an amazing patient. You never complained, even when the treatments were really hard. You always asked about other patients and how you could help them. That's because you reminded me of your grandfather, Michael replied. You had the same kindness, the same determination to help people no matter what. Michael turned back to the crowd. During my treatment, Marcus told me stories about the free clinic he was building. He talked about wanting to help kids who couldn't afford healthcare. And I realized something incredible. The crowd leaned forward, eager to hear what Michael had discovered. The little boy I helped save 30 years ago had grown up to become exactly the kind of person I hoped he would be, Michael said with pride. He became someone who saves others, just like others saved him. Arthur nodded approvingly. That's what good people do. They pass on the kindness they receive. Michael's voice grew stronger and more determined. So tonight, I want to make an announcement that I've been planning for weeks. Patricia Hendricks stepped forward with her clipboard, ready to help with whatever Michael needed. I'm retiring from all my business activities, Michael said. I'm going to spend the rest of my life working with Arthur, Marcus, and Carmen to build something amazing for our community. The crowd murmured with surprise and excitement. We're not just going to build one medical clinic, Michael continued. We're going to build 10 clinics throughout Chicago. We're not just going to build basketball courts. We're going to create community centers that offer education, healthcare, sports, and job training. Marcus's eyes lit up with amazement. Michael, that's incredible, but that will cost millions of dollars. Michael smiled. I'm donating $50 million to start the Arthur Williams Foundation for Community Excellence. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. People were cheering, crying, and hugging each other all at once. Arthur tried to speak, but was too overwhelmed with emotion. Marcus put his arm around his grandfather's shoulders. But money isn't the most important part. Michael continued over the applause. The most important part is what we learned tonight. We learned that the people who matter most aren't always the ones getting the most attention. He gestured toward the back table where they had been sitting. We learned that real heroes are often working quietly in the background, helping others without expecting recognition. Carmen stepped forward. Mr. Jordan, I want to be part of this foundation. I want to help kids feel safe and loved when they're scared or hurting. You already are part of it, Michael replied. You've been doing this work your whole career. Now we're just going to give you more resources to help even more children. Arthur finally found his voice. Michael, this is the most generous thing anyone has ever done. But I have to ask you something. What's that, Coach? Are you sure you want to name this foundation after me? You're the one making it possible. Michael knelt down next to Arthur's wheelchair. Coach, you taught me that the best leaders aren't the ones who get their names on buildings. They're the ones who build up other people. This foundation should be named after the man who taught me that lesson. The crowd gave another standing ovation. Even the servers and hotel staff had stopped working to listen and applaud. Marcus stepped to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say something about Michael Jordan. The room grew quiet again. Most people know him as one of the greatest basketball players who ever lived, Marcus said. But I know him as the teenager who saved my life, and as the patient who inspired me to be a better doctor. Marcus looked directly at Michael. You've shown me that true greatness isn't about being famous. It's about using whatever gifts you have to lift up other people. Arthur wheeled himself closer to the microphone. I want to tell all the young people in this room something important, he said. Don't wait until you're rich or famous to start helping others. Start today, wherever you are, with whatever you have. The crowd listened respectfully to Arthur's wisdom. Michael was 17 years old when he changed my life. Arthur continued. He wasn't a superstar yet. He was just a young man who saw people who needed help and decided to do something about it. Carmen raised her hand like she was in school. Can I say something too? Michael smiled and gestured for her to come to the microphone. I just want everyone to know that this is the most amazing night of my life, Carmen said. I came here feeling like I didn't belong with all these important people, but I learned that I do belong because caring about others makes everyone important. The crowd applauded warmly for Carmen's heartfelt words. Michael returned to the microphone for his final thoughts. You know what I realized tonight? I've won 6 NBA championships, but this feels like my greatest victory. He looked at Arthur, Marcus, and Carmen. Because tonight, we didn't just win something for ourselves. We created something that will help other people win too. Arthur smiled proudly. That's the only kind of victory that really matters, son. As the evening began to wind down, people throughout the ballroom approached the stage to volunteer for the new foundation. Athletes offered to coach young people. Doctors volunteered their medical services. Business owners pledged financial support. But the most meaningful moment came when a young boy from one of Arthur's old baseball teams approached the microphone. Coach Williams, the young man said, I'm Carlos Rodriguez. You coached me 15 years ago in Garfield Park. Arthur's face lit up with recognition. Carlos, Look how tall you are now. Coach, you saved my life too, Carlos said. Not with surgery, but by believing in me when no one else did. I'm a teacher now because you showed me how important it is to help kids believe in themselves. Michael watched this reunion with deep satisfaction. The circle of kindness was already bigger than any of them had imagined. That's what tonight is really about, Michael said to the crowd. It's about understanding that we're all connected. When we help one person, we help everyone. As the applause began to fade, Patricia Hendricks stepped forward with a nervous smile. She had been quiet during all the amazing revelations, but now she looked like she had something important to say. Michael, Patricia said, approaching the microphone, before this incredible evening ends, I need to confess something to you and to everyone here. Michael looked at her with curiosity. What is it, Patricia? Patricia's face turned red with embarrassment, but also with joy. There was no seating mix-up tonight. The crowd fell silent. Confused murmurs rippled through the ballroom. What do you mean? Michael asked, though he was starting to suspect what she might say. I mean, Patricia continued, that asking you to move to the back table was completely planned. There was never any mistake with the seating arrangements. Some people in the crowd looked angry. Others seemed confused. A few were starting to smile as they realized something beautiful might be happening. Michael wasn't upset. Instead, he started laughing. I had a feeling something was up. Who planned this? Patricia looked toward Marcus, who was standing next to his grandfather's wheelchair. Dr. Marcus Williams called me 3 months ago. He had a very special request. Marcus stepped forward, his face showing both nervousness and pride. I'm sorry for the deception, Mr. Jordan, but I needed to make sure my grandfather was honored properly tonight. Arthur looked up at his grandson with surprise. You planned all this? Not all of it, Grandpa, Marcus replied. I just planned the part about making sure you got the recognition you deserve. I had no idea about all the other incredible connections we would discover. Patricia continued the explanation. Marcus told me that his grandfather was too humble to promote himself for any awards. He said Arthur would probably sit in the back and let other people get all the attention. That sounds like my grandfather, Marcus said with a smile. So Marcus asked me to do something special, Patricia explained. He asked me to make sure Arthur sat with people who shared his values. People who cared more about helping others than about being famous. Michael nodded with understanding and admiration. So you asked me to move to the back table. I was terrified, Patricia admitted. I thought you might be angry or offended. But Marcus told me something that convinced me to try. What did he tell you? Yvette asked from the side of the stage. Patricia looked directly at Michael. Marcus said you were the kind of person who would understand the importance of sitting with real heroes. He said you would appreciate being at a table with people who spent their lives serving others. Arthur wheeled his chair over to Marcus and took his hand. You did all this for me. Grandpa, you've spent your whole life taking care of other people. Marcus replied. Tonight was my chance to take care of you. Carmen wiped happy tears from her eyes. This is the most beautiful plan I've ever heard of. But Patricia wasn't finished with her confession. There's more to the story, she said. The crowd leaned forward, wondering what else could possibly be revealed. Marcus also told me about a very special patient he was treating, Patricia continued. A patient who insisted on being treated like everyone else, with no special treatment. A patient who reminded Marcus of his grandfather's humble values. Michael smiled, knowing where this was going. Marcus said this patient was fighting cancer with incredible courage and grace, Patricia explained. He said this patient always asked about other sick children and how he could help them. Arthur looked back and forth between Marcus and Michael. With growing amazement, Marcus asked me to seat this patient at the back table too, Patricia said. He thought his grandfather and this mysterious patient would get along well because they both cared more about others than about themselves. The crowd was starting to understand the beautiful coincidence that had been carefully orchestrated. Of course, I had no idea that the patient was Michael Jordan, Patricia continued. Marcus used a different name at the hospital to protect his privacy. Michael laughed. I checked in as Michael Johnson. I wanted to be treated like any other patient. Marcus nodded. I knew you were someone special because of how you acted, but I had no idea you were the teenager who had saved my life 30 years ago. And I had no idea you were the little boy I had helped, Michael replied. I just knew you were an amazing doctor who cared deeply about your patients. Arthur shook his head in wonder. So you boys have been taking care of each other for months without knowing your history together. Patricia smiled broadly. The plan was just to honor Arthur and introduce him to a patient who shared his values. We never imagined all these incredible connections would be revealed. Carmen raised her hand. Can I ask how I ended up at this table? Patricia looked at her notes. You were seated here because you work at the same hospital as Dr. Williams. We thought you might enjoy meeting him. And his grandfather. And it turns out Dr. Williams saved my little brother's life 3 years ago, Carmen said with amazement. Which means, Michael added, that Marcus has been saving people in our community for years, and we're all connected through his kindness. The crowd was in awe of how perfectly everything had worked out. Patricia addressed the entire ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed tonight shows us something incredible about the power of planning for kindness. She gestured toward the 4 people on stage. When we intentionally bring together people who care about serving others, amazing things happen. Connections are revealed, stories are shared, and communities are strengthened. Michael nodded approvingly. Patricia, you and Marcus created something beautiful tonight. You proved that the best events happen when we focus on honoring the right people. Arthur spoke up from his wheelchair. I want to say something to my grandson. The crowd grew quiet to listen to Arthur's words. Marcus, what you did tonight taught me something important, Arthur said. You showed me that the kindness I tried to teach you has grown into wisdom. You knew how to bring people together in a way that would create something bigger than any of us could imagine. Marcus knelt down next to his grandfather's chair. I learned from the best teacher, Grandpa. And you, Arthur said, looking at Patricia. You took a risk to do something beautiful. You could have just seated people according to how much money they donated or how famous they were. Instead, you seated people according to their character. Patricia beamed with pride. It was the best decision I've ever made. Michael addressed the crowd one more time. I want everyone here to understand what we learned tonight. When we focus on recognizing and bringing together people who serve others, incredible things happen. He gestured toward his new friends. We discovered that kindness creates connections we never knew existed. We learned that helping one person can ripple out to help hundreds or thousands of others. Most importantly, Michael continued, we learned that the most valuable people in any room aren't always the ones getting the most attention. Sometimes they're sitting quietly in the back, working every day to make other people's lives better. Arthur raised his hand for attention. Before we end this amazing evening, I want to make one more announcement. The crowd immediately focused on the elderly coach. Next week, we're breaking ground on the first Arthur Williams Community Center in Garfield Park, Arthur said. But I don't want to just build buildings. I want to build a movement. Arthur's voice grew stronger with passion. I want every person in this room to find someone in their community who deserves recognition. Someone who's working quietly to help others. Someone who needs our support to do even more good work. The crowd murmured with enthusiasm for Arthur's challenge. Let's make tonight the beginning of a new tradition, Arthur continued. Let's spend our time and money lifting up the real heroes in our neighborhoods. Let's make sure the people doing the most important work get the help they need. Michael stepped forward. Arthur's right. Tonight changed all of us. Now it's our responsibility to change things for others. As the evening finally came to a close, people throughout the ballroom were making plans to find and support community heroes in their own neighborhoods. The truth behind the truth was that sometimes the most beautiful coincidences happen when good people plan for kindness to flourish. As the crowd began to gather their belongings and prepare to leave, Michael walked to the center of the stage one final time. The energy in the ballroom was electric. People were talking excitedly about the foundation, making plans to volunteer, and exchanging phone numbers to stay connected. Before we all go home tonight, Michael announced, I have one more surprise. Arthur looked up from his wheelchair with curiosity. Another surprise? I don't think my heart can handle much more excitement. Michael laughed. This one will make you very happy, coach. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. I've been making some phone calls during the past hour, while you all were talking and planning. Marcus stepped closer. What kind of phone calls? The kind that turn dreams into reality. Michael replied with a big smile that he looked directly at Arthur. Coach, remember when you told us about your 3 baseball fields in Garfield Park? Of course, Arthur nodded. We built them with our own hands. Well, Michael continued, I just spoke with the mayor of Chicago. Next month, The city is going to completely rebuild and expand those fields. They're going to be the most beautiful youth baseball complex in the entire state. Arthur's eyes filled with tears again. Michael, that's wonderful, but we don't need anything fancy. Simple fields work just fine. I'm not finished, Michael said with excitement. The new complex will be called the Arthur Williams Youth Sports Center. It will have baseball fields, basketball courts, soccer fields, and a community building for classes and meetings. The crowd erupted in applause. Carmen clapped so hard her hands hurt. But the best part, Michael continued, is that we're hiring 12 full-time coaches to work there. Coaches who will teach kids sports and life skills, just like you did for 40 years. Arthur covered his face with his hands, overwhelmed by emotion. Marcus knelt down next to his grandfather. Grandpa, you're going to have a whole team of coaches carrying on your work. And, Michael added, we're going to train those coaches using Arthur's methods. They'll learn how to see potential in every child, how to build confidence, and how to create safe spaces for kids who need them. Patricia Hendricks stepped forward with her clipboard. Michael, I've been taking notes about all these amazing plans. How are we going to coordinate everything? That's where you come in, Patricia. Michael replied. I want you to become the executive director of the Arthur Williams Foundation. Your job will be to make sure all these projects happen. Patricia nearly dropped her clipboard. Me? But I just organized dinner parties. No, Carmen said. You bring people together. You saw the potential in seating us all at the same table. That's exactly the kind of vision the foundation needs. Michael nodded. Patricia, you proved tonight that you understand how to connect the right people at the right time. That's the most important skill for running a foundation. Arthur wheeled himself over to Patricia. Young lady, if you can handle tonight's surprises, you can handle anything. Patricia wiped happy tears from her eyes. I would be honored to accept that position. Excellent, Michael said. Now, Marcus, I have news about the medical center. Marcus looked excited. What about it? I spoke with the boards of 3 major hospitals in Chicago, Michael explained. They're all going to partner with us. The Arthur Williams Medical Center won't just be one clinic. It's going to be a network of 5 clinics throughout the city. Marcus's mouth fell open. 5 clinics. That means we can help thousands of children every year. Exactly, Michael replied. And each clinic will be staffed by volunteer doctors who want to give back to their communities just like you do. Carmen raised her hand like she was in school again. What about the children's programs? Can I still help with those? Michael smiled at her enthusiasm. Carmen, you're going to be in charge of all the children's programs at every clinic. Your job will be to train other people to do what you do, help kids feel safe and loved when they're scared. Carmen started, crying happy tears. This is the best night of my entire life. But we're not done yet, Michael continued. Arthur, remember Carlos Rodriguez, your former player who became a teacher? Of course, Arthur said. Such a good young man. Carlos is going to become the principal of the Arthur Williams Leadership Academy. We're building a school that will teach kids academics, life skills, and community service. The crowd was amazed by the scope of these plans. What had started as a dinner party was turning into a complete transformation of their community. Arthur looked around at all the people on stage. Michael, this is incredible. But I have to ask, why are you putting my name on everything? Michael knelt down next to Arthur's wheelchair. Because, Coach, you're the one who taught all of us how to do this work. You showed me when I was 17 that real champions lift up other people. He gestured toward Marcus and Carmen. You raised a grandson who saves children's lives. You inspired a community of people who care about helping others. Your name on these buildings will remind everyone who uses them what real leadership looks like. Marcus put his hand on his grandfather's shoulder. Grandpa, your legacy isn't just the kids you coached. It's all the people they've helped, and all the people we're going to help. Arthur nodded slowly, beginning to understand the magnitude of what was happening. There's one more thing, Michael said, his voice growing soft and emotional. Arthur, I want you to know that working with you this summer when I was 17 changed the direction of my entire life. The crowd grew quiet to listen to Michael's personal reflection. I could have spent that summer playing basketball with rich kids at fancy camps, Michael continued. Instead, I spent it with you and your players in Garfield Park. That summer taught me that success isn't about how much money you make or how famous you become. Michael's voice grew stronger with conviction. Success is about how many people you help along the way. It's about using whatever gifts you have to make other people's lives better. Arthur reached up and took Michael's hand. Son, you've been living that lesson every day since then. Even when you didn't know Marcus was my grandson, you were taking care of him because that's who you are. And even when I didn't know you were my anonymous benefactor, Marcus added, I was taking care of you because Grandpa taught me that's what good people do. Carmen wiped her eyes with a tissue. This is like the most beautiful circle in the world. It is a circle, Michael agreed. But it's a circle that keeps getting bigger. Every time we help someone, they help someone else, and it grows and grows. Patricia looked at her notes. So let me make sure I understand all these plans. We're building sports complexes, medical clinics, schools, and community centers. That's right, Michael nodded. And we're training hundreds of people to work in them. Coaches, teachers, doctors, counselors, and volunteers. How long will it take to build all of this? Someone from the crowd called out. Marcus stepped forward. We're going to start construction next month. The first medical clinic opens in 6 months. The sports center opens in a year. And the leadership academy opens in 18 months. Arthur shook his head in amazement. When I woke up this morning, I was just an old coach in a wheelchair. Now I'm going to have buildings and programs named after me all over Chicago. You're not just an old coach, Carmen said firmly. You're the person who started all of this. You're the reason Michael learned to help others. You're the reason Marcus became a doctor. You're the reason hundreds of kids learned to believe in themselves. Michael addressed the crowd one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, what we've created tonight proves something important. When good people work together, there's no limit to what we can accomplish. He looked at his new friends on the stage. Arthur taught us to care about our community. Marcus taught us to heal people's pain. Carmen taught us to comfort people when they're scared. Patricia taught us to bring the right people together. The crowd gave them a final standing ovation. Now, Michael concluded, let's go out and change the world, one person at a time. As people began to leave the ballroom, they weren't just going home from a dinner party. They were going home as part of a movement that would transform their city and touch thousands of lives. The legacy was no longer just Arthur's. It belonged to everyone who had been inspired by his example of quiet, steady service to others. The evening wound down. Most of the crowd had left the ballroom. The servers were quietly cleaning tables and stacking chairs. But at the back table where everything had begun, four special friends sat together, talking quietly about what had just happened. Michael, Arthur, Marcus, and Carmen were joined by Yvette, Zara, and Patricia. They formed a small circle, their voices soft and thoughtful as the ballroom grew quieter around them. I keep thinking this is all a dream, Carmen said, shaking her head in wonder. This morning I was nervous about coming to a fancy dinner. Now I'm going to help run programs that will help thousands of children. Arthur reached over and patted her hand. Young lady, dreams are just plans that haven't happened yet. And now we have the people and resources to make these dreams real. Zara, who had been quietly listening all evening, tugged on her father's sleeve. Daddy, can I ask Mr. Arthur something? Of course, sweetheart, Michael replied. Zara looked at Arthur with her big, curious eyes. Mr. Arthur, how did you know that helping kids would make such a big difference? Arthur smiled at the 10-year-old's thoughtful question. You know what, Zara? I didn't know. When I started coaching, I just saw kids who needed someone to believe in them. I thought maybe I could help them learn baseball. But you did so much more than that, Marcus said, looking at his grandfather with deep admiration. That's the secret, Arthur replied. When you start helping people with love in your heart, it always grows into something bigger than you planned. Patricia looked up from her notes. I've been thinking about what happened tonight. This wasn't just about awards or recognition. This was about discovering connections that have been there all along. Michael nodded. You're right. Arthur and I were connected for 30 years without knowing it. Marcus has been taking care of me for months without knowing our history. Carmen works at the same hospital where Marcus saves lives. And now we're all connected in a way that will help our community for generations, Yvette added. Arthur looked around the nearly empty ballroom. You know what I've realized? This room looks completely different to me now than it did when we walked in. What do you mean? Carmen asked. When we first sat down here, Arthur explained. I thought this was just a fancy party for rich people. I felt out of place. He gestured toward the front tables, now empty and being cleaned. But now I understand something important. It doesn't matter where you sit or how much money you have. What matters is how you treat the people around you. Michael stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the Chicago skyline. The city. Lights twinkled like stars in the darkness. Arthur, when I was 17 and spent that summer with your team, I thought I was just killing time before basketball season started, Michael said reflectively. The others listened carefully to his quiet voice. I had no idea I was learning the most important lesson of my life, Michael continued. I thought success would come from winning games and making money. But you taught me that real success comes from lifting up other people. Marcus joined his patient and friend at the window. And when I was 8 years old, lying in that hospital bed, I thought I was just getting surgery to fix my heart. But you were really getting a lesson about how people take care of each other, Arthur said softly. Exactly, Marcus replied. That experience taught me that when someone saves your life, you have a responsibility to save other lives too. Carmen walked over to join them at the window. And when I started working at the hospital, I thought I was just helping kids feel less scared. But you were really learning how to heal hearts, not just bodies, Yvette observed. Patricia gathered her papers and stood up. This has been the most incredible night of my career. But I think the real work starts tomorrow. You're right, Michael said, turning back to the group. Tonight was about understanding our connections. Tomorrow is about using those connections to help others. Arthur wheeled his chair over to the window. Look out there, he said, pointing at the city lights. Each one of those lights represents a family. Some of those families have kids who need coaches, doctors, teachers, and friends. And now we have the resources to help them, Marcus added. More importantly, Arthur continued, we have the understanding that helping them will create new connections, new stories, and new possibilities we can't even imagine yet. Zara walked over to Arthur's wheelchair. Mr. Arthur, will you teach me how to help other kids? Arthur's eyes filled with happy tears. Sweet girl, I think you're already learning just by watching your father and listening to these conversations. Michael knelt down next to his daughter. Zara, what did you learn tonight? I learned that the most important people aren't always the famous ones, Zara said thoughtfully. And I learned that when you help someone, it keeps going and going like a ripple in a pond. That's exactly right, Arthur said proudly. You're very wise for 10 years old. Carmen sat back down at their table. I have a confession to make, she said quietly. Everyone turned to listen. When Patricia first asked me to move to the back table, I was disappointed, Carmen admitted. I thought it meant I wasn't important enough to sit with the important people. And now, Michael asked gently, now I realize that this was the most important table in the room, Carmen said with a smile. This is where the real champions were sitting. Arthur nodded approvingly. Carmen, you've learned something tonight that took me years to understand. The people doing the most important work are often the ones getting the least attention. Patricia looked at her watch. I hate to break up this conversation, but the hotel staff needs to finish cleaning. As they gathered their belongings, Michael turned to Arthur one more time. Coach, I have one last question for you. What's that, son? Do you remember what you told me on my last day of coaching with your team 30 years ago? Arthur thought for a moment, then smiled. I told you that real champions don't just win games. They change lives. That's right, Michael replied. And tonight, I finally understand what you meant. He looked around at Marcus, Carmen, Patricia, and his own family. You taught me that the most important victories aren't about beating someone else. They're about lifting everyone up together. Arthur reached up and took Michael's hand. Son, you've been living that lesson your whole life. You just needed tonight to see how big the victory really is. As they walked toward the exit, Marcus, supporting his grandfather's wheelchair, Carmen walking beside Patricia, and Michael holding hands with Yvette and Zara, they looked like what they had become, a family. You know what I've learned? Michael said as they reached the ballroom doors. What's that? Arthur asked. I've won 6 NBA championships, but tonight feels like my biggest victory. Arthur smiled. That's because tonight, we all won together. They looked back at the empty ballroom one more time. In a few hours, it would be restored to its original state, ready for the next event. But the people who had sat at that back table would never be the same. Ready to go change the world? Marcus asked the group. We already started, Carmen replied. Tonight was just the beginning. As they walked out into the Chicago night, they carried with them the understanding that the most important championships in life are the ones where everyone wins together. Behind them, the empty ballroom held the echoes of the most extraordinary evening any of them had ever experienced. An evening that began with disappointment about seating arrangements and ended with a movement that would touch thousands of lives. The real championship had been won not on a basketball court, but at a back table in a ballroom where four people discovered that their lives had been connected by kindness for 30 years, and the victory celebration would last for generations. 5 years after that magical evening at the Chicago Sports Heroes Gala, the Arthur Williams Foundation had grown beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The victory celebration was no longer just a memory. It had become a living, breathing movement that touched lives every single day. The grand ballroom of the Chicago Grand Hotel looked exactly the same as it had 5 years ago. Crystal glasses sparkled under bright lights. Round tables covered with white cloth filled the room. Waiters in black uniforms carried silver trays of food, but everything else had changed completely. This year's gala was different from any awards dinner the city had ever seen. The front tables were filled with young people from the foundation's programs. Many were now in college on scholarships. Some had become doctors, teachers, and coaches themselves. Others were starting their own programs to help children in their communities. At the head table sat Arthur Williams, now 85 years old, still in his wheelchair, but with eyes that sparkled brighter than the crystal glasses around him. His health was slowly failing, but his spirit was stronger than ever. He was surrounded by dozens of young people who called him Grandpa Coach. Michael Jordan sat next to him, healthy and happy after 5 years of being cancer-free. His hair was a little grayer, but his smile was bigger than it had ever been. Next to Michael sat Yvette and Zara, now 15 years old and already volunteering at the Foundation's youth programs. Dr. Marcus Williams stood at the podium as the evening's keynote speaker. He had been promoted to chief of pediatric surgery at Chicago Children's Hospital and had been named one of the top doctors in America. But tonight, he wasn't talking about his medical achievements. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said into the microphone, "5 years ago, my grandfather taught me something important. He taught me that the most important victories happen when we lift each other up." The crowd, a mix of foundation staff, community leaders, and hundreds of young people whose lives had been changed, listened carefully. "Tonight, I want to share some numbers with you," Marcus continued. "Numbers that show what happens when good people work together." He gestured toward a large screen that showed pictures of smiling children and families. The Arthur Williams Foundation has built 15 basketball courts, 8 medical clinics, and 3 community schools across Chicago. We have provided free health care to over 5,000 children. We have given college scholarships to 200 young people. The crowd applauded enthusiastically, but Marcus continued. "But the most important number is this one. We have trained over 800 community volunteers, coaches, tutors, mentors, and friends who are now helping other children in their neighborhoods." Arthur beamed with pride as he listened to his grandson share their accomplishments. "Those 800 volunteers are now helping tens of thousands of children," Marcus said. "And those children will grow up to help others." The circle keeps growing bigger and bigger. From her seat at the head table, Carmen Rodriguez Martinez stood up to speak. She was now married to one of the Foundation's coaches and had 2 young children of her own. As the Foundation's director of youth programs, she oversaw all the children's activities across the city. "5 years ago, I was nervous about sitting at the back table," Carmen said with a laugh. "I thought I didn't belong with important people." The crowd chuckled, many of them knowing the famous story of that first evening. "Now I understand that importance isn't about how much money you have or how famous you are," Carmen continued. "Importance is about how much you care about helping others." She gestured toward the young people at the front tables. "These young people are the real stars of our foundation. They're tutoring younger kids, coaching sports teams, and volunteering at hospitals. They learned that receiving help means you have a responsibility to help others too." Patricia Hendricks, now the Foundation's executive director, approached the microphone next. Her organization had grown from planning 1 dinner party per year to coordinating dozens of programs that operated every day. "5 years ago, we made a mistake with the seating arrangements," Patricia said with a smile. "It turned out to be the best mistake we ever made." The crowd laughed and applauded. That mistake taught us something important about how to run our programs, Patricia continued. We learned that the best way to honor people is to put them together with others who share their values. She looked around the room at the diverse crowd of people who had come together for a common purpose. Every program we run follows the same principle, Patricia explained. We bring together people who care about helping others. We don't care about their background or how much money they have. We only care about their heart. As the evening continued, young people from the Foundation's programs took turns sharing their stories. A 17-year-old named David talked about how the basketball program had kept him away from gangs and helped him get a college scholarship. That a 14-year-old girl named Maria shared how the free medical clinic had saved her baby brother's life when her family couldn't afford healthcare. A 12-year-old boy named James explained how his mentor from the Foundation had helped him learn to read and discover that he loved science. Each story was different, but they all had the same theme. Someone had cared enough to help, and now these young people were helping others. Finally, Arthur Williams was helped to the microphone for what everyone knew would be his final speech as the Foundation's inspiration and guide. 60 years ago, I started coaching baseball because I saw kids who needed someone to believe in them. Arthur began, his voice weak but clear. The room fell completely silent. Even the servers stopped moving to listen. I thought maybe I could teach them how to hit a ball or catch a fly. Arthur continued with a small smile. I had no idea I was starting something that would still be growing 50 years later. Arthur paused, looking out at the crowd of people whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's work. But I want to tell you the real secret of what we've accomplished, Arthur said, his voice growing stronger. The crowd leaned forward, eager to hear his wisdom. The secret isn't the buildings we've built or the money we've raised, Arthur explained. The secret is that we learn to see each other as family. Arthur gestured toward Michael, Marcus, and Carmen. 5 years ago, we were strangers sitting at a table. Tonight, we're a family that includes hundreds of people who take care of each other. Tears were flowing freely throughout the crowd. That's what I want you to remember when you leave here tonight, Arthur continued. You're not just volunteers or donors or staff members. You're family, and family takes care of each other. Arthur looked directly at the young people at the front tables. To all the young people here tonight, I want you to know something. You are the reason this old coach's life has been worthwhile. The teenagers and college students wiped their eyes, deeply moved by Arthur's words. You've taken the love we gave you and multiplied it, Arthur said. You've proven that kindness never ends. It just keeps growing from one person to another to another. As Arthur finished speaking, something beautiful happened. The young people at the front table stood up and began walking toward the stage. One by one, they climbed the steps to hug the elderly coach who had inspired the movement that changed their lives. Michael watched this parade of young people with tears in his eyes. Each hug represented a life that had been touched, a future that had been brightened, a family that had been helped. When the last young person had hugged Arthur, Michael stepped to the microphone one final time. 5 years ago, I thought I knew what victory looked like, Michael said. I thought it was about winning championships and earning trophies. He looked at Arthur, then at the crowd of Foundation family members. But tonight, I know what real victory looks like, Michael continued. It looks like young people who believe in themselves. It looks like families who have hope. It looks like communities that take care of each other. Michael's voice grew strong with conviction. Ladies and gentlemen, we didn't just win a championship 5 years ago. We started a legacy that will continue long after all of us are gone. As the evening came to an end, people didn't just go home from a dinner party. They went home as part of a family that had proven something important. When good people work together with love in their hearts, there is no limit to the good they can do. The back table where it all began was now a symbol displayed in the Foundation's headquarters, reminding everyone that the most important people aren't always the ones getting the most attention. And in neighborhoods throughout Chicago, children were falling asleep knowing that tomorrow they would wake up in a community where people cared about them, believed in them, and would help them become the best versions of themselves. The victory celebration that started with 4 strangers at a back table had indeed lasted for generations, just as promised. What an incredible journey we just shared together. From that back table to a movement that changed thousands of lives. We learned that real champions don't just win games, they lift up others. This story shows us that kindness never really ends. It just keeps growing from one person to another, creating circles of hope that can last for generations. That I'd love to know. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment and tell me your city or country. It's amazing to think that Arthur's lesson about helping others is now reaching people all around the world. If this story touched your heart like it touched mine, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. When you subscribe, you're helping us spread more stories about kindness and hope to people who need to hear them. Remember, you don't have to be famous or rich to make a difference. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply care about the person sitting next to you. And speaking of inspiring stories, there's another incredible tale waiting for you right on your screen. Click on it now, you won't want to miss what happens next. Keep spreading kindness, and I'll see you in the next story.